Should you actually trust the Federal Reserve? The same Federal Reserve that is the pillar for economic stability within America. There's actually a case against it, and that's what we're going to explore in this video. So stick around till the end and I'll let you be the judge on whether or not we should actually trust the Federal Reserve strategy. All right, so the main goal of the Federal Reserve is to manage the nation's money supply and influence the overall economy. They do this with a couple different tools that we're going to get into. Behind the scenes, its policies are subject to pretty intense and ongoing debate between all the Fed governors. Recently, public criticism has focused on the Fed's handling of interest rates and its overall size, sparking a conversation about potential foundational changes to the actual institution. And it is this public criticism that is shedding light on whether or not the Fed is actually doing the job that it should be. At the heart of the current economic discussion is the level of interest rates. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate: to achieve maximum employment and maintain stable prices. Now, both of those are a key part of its inflation-fighting policy. When inflation is high, the Fed typically has to raise interest rates in order to slow down spending and cool the economy, or that's their current strategy, and that's kind of what's under criticism right now. So critics argue that the Fed's current interest rate cutting policy is anti-growth. They contend that these high rates make it too expensive for businesses, particularly small and medium-sized ones, to borrow money for investment, expansion, and innovation. And that kind of does make sense. If you are a smaller business, you have access to less capital, so the amount of capital that you have that has a higher interest rate is going to impact you a lot more versus if you were a large business with a lot of cash on hand. Furthermore, critiques point out that the high interest rate that the Fed pays to banks on their reserve balances, which is a significant cost of their budget, are much higher than inflation and the rates available in many other countries. A substantial cut, they suggest, would save billions on the national debt and provide a much needed stimulus to the economy. So these same critiques that are questioning the Fed's structure and models critique more than just their interest rate strategy, and some economists and policymakers are calling for them to actually make a more fundamental restructuring of the Fed. One key critique centers on its sheer size, with some arguing that its network of regional banks and its extensive market interventions have grown far too large and are effectively crowding out private interbank lending markets that were once vibrant. The Fed has essentially become the default lender for banks that used to use other banks to lend them money, and it's kind of shrunk that private interbank lending market. So people want the Fed out so that way other banks can get involved in that same process. The core of the academic analysis, however, lies in the Fed's economic models. Historically, the Fed has operated on the theory that fast economic growth and low unemployment inevitably lead to inflation, a concept rooted in what we call the Phillips curve. This model suggests a trade-off. To lower inflation, a central bank might have to tolerate higher unemployment. You can't have one without the other, basically. But critics say that this model is kind of outdated, and it relies on lagging indicators, which are backwards-looking data points. So instead of that, they propose that the Fed should rely on forward-looking metrics, market-based data, and focus on defending the value of the dollar. Now, that's easier said than done because we can see what has happened in the past due to historical trends and data points. Predicting the future is a little bit of a different game, but critiques of the Federal Reserve's current game plan think that that is the way that we should be going. To help us further understand this debate, it's helpful to look back at the early 1980s, a period of stagflation characterized by high inflation and high unemployment, the ideal situation that the Fed does not want to end up in again. Under the leadership of Chairman Paul Volcker, the Fed aggressively raised interest rates in order to combat inflation. The policy successfully brought down prices, but also triggered two severe recessions. So this is where the critique comes in. While many credit Volcker's tough stance with ending the inflation crisis, others argue that subsequent pro-growth fiscal policies, such as significant tax cuts, were the true catalysts for economic recovery and sustained low inflation, not the Fed attacking it the way that they normally do. This historical example highlights the central tension here. Do high interest rates actually combat inflation, or do they just simply cause economic pain that ultimately helps producers and supply chains more than consumers and consumption? The Fed's models have often been criticized for relying on lagging estimates and for failing to account for the impact of factors like government spending, which is actually something that we should not be ignoring. So to sum this all up, the debate over the Federal Reserve's role is more than just a political talking point. It's pretty much a fundamental economic discussion that is taking place, especially with the current Trump administration putting pressure on Powell to lower interest rates in order to better conform with their current economic policy of the administration. And this overall economic discussion touches on how best to manage inflation, whether the Fed's size is appropriate, and if a traditional economic model like backwards-looking historical data points still serve a modern, more complex economy than when those fundamentals were originally established. Ultimately, the way forward could shape the economic landscape for years to come. If we have Trump replace Powell and replace the board of governors with people that are more conforming to what their economic outlook and policies are, that's going to be an interesting future. I'm not saying it's bad or good. Some people think it's bad, some people think it's good. There's a case to be made on both sides, but that is something that we should be paying attention to going forward. So what do you guys think? Should the Federal Reserve alter its course and change the way that it collects data and makes predictions, or are its current policies a necessary tool for maintaining economic stability, even though it causes pain down the road? This has been Jake. If you guys enjoy this type of content, please leave a like, drop a comment letting me know your thoughts, and subscribe to make sure you can stay up to date on more videos like this one in the future. See you guys in the next one. Peace.